I was trying to think about what questions to ask to set you up to share as many insights and stories as possible, because I wasn't sure if this might end up being a one-off and we wouldn't get you back anytime soon. So I thought, how do we get everything Paul's got all in like one whole hour, which I know is impossible. But so I started to think about a unifying theme. And what struck me, given the coronavirus and also, I'm sure, because of your connections in the States, you've also been following things going on here the last few days. And what leapt out to me again was Romans 8:19-23. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for the adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. And I remember reading that verse 19 a few years ago and thinking, surely it should say the revealing of the Son of God. In other words, the revealing of Jesus. But it doesn't. It talks about the revealing of us as his fully mature sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, representatives. And so perhaps as you're sharing parts of your story, Paul, you can focus in how the Father brings us into that place of becoming mature sons and daughters that look like the Father and that the world needs so much at this time. So maybe just start off, tell us a little bit about the beginnings of your journey, because how you came to know the Lord was a little unusual all by itself. So why don't you start there and unpack a little bit?
Yeah. Now, well, I got saved on February the 28th, 1973 at 3:30 in the afternoon. So I can tell you the address as well if you like. I got saved by my father's dead body. He just died, and he died of cancer. And I knew that he loved God. And my uncle prayed a prayer, and he said, God, you've closed one chapter of a book today. And I said, then start a new one and put my name in it. And I've since done the full sinner's prayer, just in case that wasn't enough, but I'm pretty confident it was okay. I think I met all the requirements. And I have behind me on a shelf there well, my father's preaching notes, handwritten preaching notes from just prior to that. So yeah, I got saved when I was 15. I'm like many people. I didn't really know my dad. I didn't know my dad as a male to male adult. I knew him as a boy. I was 13 when he got sick, and that was pretty much the end of, that real kind of father-son experience, other than, taking care of him and watching him be sick and have a couple of conversations. So that's how I got saved. And I think somewhere in the questionings, it was something like, how has that marked you? Or how has that affected you? And I believe with all my heart that what you are saved from, or the circumstances you are saved in, are something that God will revisit time and time again. The drug addict who is saved in the drug den will never walk past a drug den and not want the same thing to happen in other people's lives. For me, mine has become a desire that, people become sons and daughters, that people become fathers, that people experience the love of the Father. And that to me is really how I've tried to live that out. I didn't work that out at the time. It took me best part of 32 years actually to really realize that was a huge part of my assignment. But yeah, that's where it all began back there.
Yeah, that's amazing, coming to know the Lord on the same day that your dad died. So you also have a pretty unusual career path or ministry path. Tell us about some of the stages in that and how they shaped you and kept preparing you for the next thing.
Yeah, there's nothing really very unusual about it at all, really. It's all looking after a bunch of broken people, and trying to put them back together again. That's pretty much my life story. I was having my hair cut. I don't know if if you remember when you used to be able to have your hair cut, but the hairdresser, was just said to me, so what do you do? And I just told him, my three main careers. And he said, oh my gosh, they're all so different. I said, no, they're not. They're all the same. They're just broken people. So I was called to the ministry in 1975. Now, I wouldn't use that phrase today. I don't even like the phrase because it can create division, and I don't believe in it. I believe there are people in career ministry, and that's okay, but we're all in ministry, and that is so important to me that it's almost one of the most important things to me in this season. And so I wrote to my wife, who wasn't my wife then, but her grandfather, and I asked him for some advice. I said, I've got a call to ministry. How do I get ready? And he told me to go and get some experience working with people, which is very good advice for a pastor. I've had some pastors with that advice. It would have helped them a lot. And so I trained as a psychiatric and general nurse, and I did that for 5 years. I then couldn't afford to pay the bills and left being a nurse and worked in prison. I say, one day I was saving people's lives. The next day I was locking up people who'd taken people's lives, and I doubled my pay overnight. So you can work that one out if you like. Politically, that's not a surprise, but it's wrong. And so in prison for 19 years, and I ended up being a prison governor or warden in your language, and did that. And then 2001 jumped on a plane 4 days after 9/11, supporting my wife in her pursuit of what God had for her, and went to Bethel and was part of a class in School of Ministry of 101 people, and a church that was relatively, at the time, had lost a lot of people. And about a year after I arrived there, they asked me to join the senior team. And so I joined the senior team and did that for best part of 15 years. So, but yeah, they're unusual. It's given me, in the different age groups of people on here, but the younger ones, you seem to have been obsessed with branding. Sort of it feels like everyone was trying to brand everybody for the last 10 years. People in my office, I love the millennials, but I think the millennials really championed this one. And people would come in my office, and for various reasons, new websites or whatever, they'd try and brand me. And about 5 years of that, somebody walked into my office, and he began to start the conversation. I looked at him, I said, I'm kind of done with this conversation. He said, no. He says, I'll tell you what your brand is. And I said, go on. And he said, your brand is diversity. And I was like, oh, you've done it. You've nailed it. That is it. And I wrote a blog a couple of years ago about diversity, because I have sat with the most broken, and I've sat with the famous and the powerful. I've cut people down who've tried to kill themselves. I've tried to resuscitate people. I've sat on beds of kids dying. I've been to coroner's court. I've been the first one to call a family to say that their son had taken their life. I've done strategic planning, and I'm a hostage negotiator trainer, and I'm a riot commander, and I'm a counselor, a coach, and a consultant. I've done a whole bunch of things. I love to take photographs. I don't love to be in them very much, but I love to take photographs. I love to cook. I love music. I'm not a musician. I love life, basically. So there's a lot of diversity, and it's either my weakness or my strength, depending on what day of the week it is. So yeah, that's a bit of me.
Yeah, I think when we were talking over FaceTime 10 days or so ago, you delayed our connection for a quarter of an hour so you should get some good fox photos down the end of the garden.
That's true,
right?
Story, yeah.
Yeah, I think I had a peep on your Facebook to see those. Look pretty good. I love foxes too. I know one of the other
daylight, you see.
So that
You
again?
don't often see them in the daylight in England.
Yes.
So to get the chance to, and they've got some cubs, but we haven't seen them yet. So yeah, it's been fun.
Yes. So I know I've heard you talk as well about an experience you had at another kind of turning point where they'd asked you to start heading up the kind of global arm of Bethel, and you're asking the Lord about how do I father an organization? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was around about 2004, 2005. And Bill and Chris had asked me to build our network. I was listening to Danny Silk preach, and I was talking to God at the same time. And I said that question: how do you father? Because the emphasis was that a word had been given to Bill and Randy Clark that they were going around the world kind of having children, but they weren't fathering them. There was no system to father them. And so I just asked God that question, and he said, well, you have to be a son. And then he said to me, but you stopped being a son the day your father died. It's true. So I went on a journey that week that has never stopped. And, you know, what I was that I really had stopped being a son the day my father died. You know, my relatives came and slapped me on the back and said, you know, you're the man of the house now. You know, look after your mum, take care of the house and garden and help in the business. And I mean, you know, one of my relatives bought me a Black & Decker workmate the day after my father died. I mean, who does that, you know? Like a workbench. I mean, who does that, really? So 32 years later, I had a revelation that I'd stopped being a son. And the first thing I did, which honestly, I don't remember anyone ever saying it this way, but the first thing I did was I repented. And I think the church gets too up in repentance being about sin, as in things we've done wrong, but really repentance glory. And Romans 3:23 says all have sinned and fallen short of the glory. So, you know, if you repent from sin, that's okay, but you actually need to repent unto glory. And repenting unto sonship was a key piece of my journey. And three main things happened to me that week. I repented, and then I asked God, I said, you know, what do you do? I mean, how do I fill the gap? The Bible says that he restores or redeems, depending on translation, the years the locusts have eaten. And that's a great verse, but what does it mean? Like, how do you do it? Because I'm a practical guy. I'm practical around the Bible, the supernatural. I want to know how. I'm not interested in a theology. I want an application of my theology. I want to live it. So, and he said to me, I was just reading Bill's second book actually at the time, Bill Johnson's Supernatural Power of a Transformed Mind. And in there's a chapter about sanctified imagination. And I don't know how I put it together. Sometimes you know what it's like. Sometimes you get these converging thoughts and you do something. It's like, oh. And I laid on my bed and I had a conversation with my dad in my imagination. 32 years after he died, I had a chat. Not weird. I wasn't speaking to the dead. I just went, hey, this is me. This is what I've done. This is who I married. This is my boys. This is what you'd love about them. This is what they'd love about you. And I got off the bed different. And it was because I'd consciously put a father's voice back in my head. And then I watched God restore what I call my son's pantry. I just watched him put that in place. It was life-changing, actually, genuinely life-changing. And the interesting thing, the funny thing is that, you know, I had that conversation and Pete's picked up my new book, but when I'd finished writing it and I needed an introduction, and a friend of mine said, why don't you write a letter to your dad? So I wrote a letter to my dad as the introduction to my book. It's probably the best chapter of the book, and taught me something, because I realized, my dad died when I was 15, and there'll be people on here that your dad's died, or you never knew your dad, or your dad abandoned you, or your dad hurt you, the whole range. And the Father that's what Romans 8's all about, that the whole earth is actually waiting for us to find out who we are and step into the authority that we're meant to have. But what I realized was that so much of my life was influenced by a man that died when I was 15, before I ever had an adult-to-adult conversation with him. I could barely tell you anything he said, but I can remember what he did. And that's the key to me of that. So yeah, that was I wasn't expecting that moment, but it changed me. And I say to people, I've been called a lot of things in my life. And obviously quite a lot of nice things I've been called. I've been called some pretty bad things because I worked in prison. We won't go there, it's Sunday, but the only title I want is Father. I don't want any other title than that. I'm a son, but I don't want any other title in any environment. And I don't know whether I'm jumping, but you said we might bounce around, but I was given a prophetic word in 2012 on Sunday night that I would preach in stadiums, that I would raise up young evangelists. And I found myself, and there's lots of peace in there, but I went to Reinhard Bonnke's school, and then I went to Awakening Europe, and I preached in a stadium. Now you have to know that wasn't me. That's not what I did. I wasn't raised in that world. I had no aspirations of doing that. But the first time I ever preached in a stadium, a man washed my feet in front of 26,000 people and introduced me as a father. And that to me is, if people experience in my presence the Father, I think that's all I want. I don't think I want anything else. I want people to experience that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful, Paul. I know my dad died 20 years ago, and in the build up to that, he had cancer, so we kind of knew it was coming, and we'd already had the conversations about the bad stuff that we needed to make sure we put right. He knew the Lord, I knew the Lord. We talked through all of that. But I realized in that year and a half or so after he was diagnosed and before he went to be with the Lord, that I'd never told him how proud of him I was. And so I did a similar sort of thing where I just wrote him a letter and I said, Dad, I've never told you how proud I am about who you are and what you've done for the Lord and all that kind of stuff. And there was something about connecting with that kind of healthy side of fathering that it unlocked something in me. And then, hearing your story too, I had to revisit that and say, did I do the same thing when my dad died? Did I stop seeing myself as a son? And I think I largely did. So, that if we get that bit right, if we really become in our core identity well-loved sons or well-loved daughters, then everything else begins to start to get better and come right. It's just it is the only foundation, I think. And so I love hearing your journey into that and what that looked like. Yeah. So with the book that you just put out, The Things Fathers Do, you got a lot of practical stuff, I think, in terms of folks who talk about the Father heart of God and the goodness of God. Kind of your speciality within that, I think, perhaps is boiling it down and making it practical and applicable, beyond just sort of receiving inner healing and stuff like that, which a lot of folks talk about. You've got some specific things. What are a few of your favorites in the book that you just go, I love doing that and I love being on the receiving end of that? Or
yeah, to me it has to be practical. I think that men, now ladies, you might get this as well, but I'm a guy, so I can only really talk about it from my perspective. I think men sometimes get a hard rap, for want of a better word, because we will tend more into doing. And I get it that we've got to contemplate and rest and all of those kind of things. But, you know, the Father shows up on the planet, which he created, because the first thing he did in the Bible is do something. So that's why it's important to me. It's important that we validate the doing. And it's, you know, obviously if we're driven, if we're performance oriented, we've got a problem, but there's something about doing. So what are my favorites? I'll tell you my absolute favorite. And because I think it's one that guys need to get. Fathers show their children how to love their future spouse. And, you know, my dad taught me that. My dad took me shopping, and I mean, I was in lingerie shops when I was 10, sort of thing, buying for my mother with my dad, you know. Now, I come around guys and they don't do that. They don't know how to do that. You know, I'd say if you don't know what size your wife is, you better do some homework, you know. And if you haven't got a good memory, write it down. Get good at this, you know. So, and whether it's taking a cup of tea to upstairs in the morning, or coffee, or, you know, whatever. I think that one of the most important things that we get to do is to show our kids how to love their future spouse. And I don't know many things more important than that. Because, you know, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So that's very, very important to me. I think another one that's really important to me is we show our kids the world. Now, again, this isn't exclusive, and it just depends on your own personal experience, how you'll feel about this. But I was definitely in the early days at Bethel around some of the sozo stuff, and I'd hear all the, well, you know, the mom is the nurturer and all of those elements, and that's like the Holy Spirit. And, you know, I'm good, that's okay. But hold on a minute. I was at work for 75 hours a week for a season of my life, and some of it 85 hours a week. And I was on call 24/7 for the last 10 years before I moved to Bethel. So where does that leave me? Was I a bad father? Did I fail? Did I abandon them? And there's an experience that I had. My wife was in the worship team at the church, and I was deputy governor of a very difficult young offenders prison. She used to do her worship practice on Tuesday nights, and I was on call. I was the duty governor that night, and I got a call that a young man had tried to kill himself, which meant I needed to go, you know. And I bundled my boys up and I dumped them at the church. And I mean, it was kind of like I dumped them. And I think it was pre-cell phone. It wasn't that kind of world, you know. So I turn up and burst through the back door and go, I got to leave the kids here. I got to go, you know. And I felt horrible about it. But here's the thing, for 6 months, my sons asked me how that boy was doing. They wanted to know, how is he? I can tell you, to this day, I don't know two more sensitive young men around self-harm and suicide. My eldest son is a school teacher in a high school, the director of music, and he has a sensitivity for the pressures that his students have in that area, which is huge today. I mean, it felt like in my day it was in prison and not so much in the public arena. And my youngest son has lost 3 of his best friends to suicide. I showed my boys a piece of the world. It was something that they know. They know that their dad went and tried to help people that couldn't help themselves. And I think it's huge. I think it's really important that us dads realize that. You know, now I'm not saying it's not mums. There's a chapter in the book about women because women reveal the Father, and I'm really passionate about that. But I'm not into equality. I'm into equal value. But I'm not into equality. It doesn't work. We're different, you know. No, I'm not sure if you're breastfeeding that lady there right now, but I can't do that, you know. So, you know, if you were, I can't do that. But we're equal value. So that's really important. Those are probably, I mean, when I first preached it, there were 32. I think there's about 28 individual things fathers do in the book. You know, they show their children wonder and joy. This is huge, really huge, that we make sure that we never allow children to lose the sense of wonder. And my little grandson, I've got an 8-year-old grandson these days, you know, the other night I took a photo of the moon. And it's amazing what you can do with a camera these days, because you zoom in, it's amazing. I mean, you would have paid good money for that photograph when I was a kid. But the wonder on his face, it's like, did you take this, Paps? This is yours? How did you do that? And, you know, it's so, you know, dads and granddads, they show their kids wonder. Another one is we teach our children what they love. We help them discover what they love. What do you love? And this world is so complex, and yet we need to each one be given permission to discover what we love, the colors, the tastes, the ideas. And it's probably no surprise, and it's not just me, but I have 2 sons with a justice button that's huge, because they love justice. You know, they hate injustice, but it's only really because they love justice. So yeah, those are a few of them. I'll tell you where the list came from. Just so I went in 2014, I went to Brazil, and I went on a ministry trip, but I also got to be there for the Soccer World Cup. And I took my youngest son, and it was the most wonderful experience. England were terrible. We were awful. But it's the greatest trip, definitely of its kind, but it may be the greatest trip of my life ever, because it was me and him. And I'd never done that with my dad. And I can remember, actually, my dad had tickets for a major football match when I was a young boy. And it broke his heart that he couldn't take me. I remember him. It's like he couldn't take me because they were business tickets from his work. And my trip to Brazil redeemed that. It filled the gap. And I was due to preach. It was a strange year at Bethel. And I was preaching. I didn't do very many Sunday mornings, but I was preaching Sunday morning. And I was on a plane Saturday night. And I didn't have a message. I just didn't have a message. And all I did was I sat on a plane and I thought, fathers do things. I've just been 2 weeks with my youngest son, and fathers do things. And so I just wrote this list that just spewed out, and it was fun. 32-point message.
Yeah, I was doing a little equipping class yesterday with some folks about how to prepare a message. I didn't cover how to do a 32-point. That wasn't included.
You didn't tell them to leave it till the last minute or on your plane in the middle of the night either.
Right. But I love that point, Paul. I mean, I have another guy who's a friend of mine, and I read a book that his brother wrote, and he was talking about that doing dynamic and how it kind of gets bad press in the church because we read the Mary Martha story and all of that, and I loved what he said. He said, if all my relationship with my wife was me saying, I love you and I think you're beautiful, and her saying I love you, and if it was only a conversation and we never actually did anything, it still isn't much of a relationship. And
that's right.
I think that whole dimension of going on an adventure with the Lord, going on an adventure with someone else, you travel, you have experiences, you do stuff, all of that, that's relationship too. And I think we've almost sort of boiled all of our faith down into, it's that, 15, 20, 30 minutes a day where you sit down with your Bible and you pray, and all the rest of it, it's another sort of secular spiritual divide in a different sort of way, isn't it? And not really how it works, because he's involved in all of that other stuff, as well as the bit that, you know, where we're actually focused on him, perhaps in a more intentional way. And I love that, you know, that doing isn't kind of disallowed or a bad thing. It's a huge part of how we live this stuff out. So that's great. So tell us maybe just one or two of your real favorite stories or moments where there was just a, you know, the Lord met you, or you just have one of those times where he broke into a situation.
Yeah, and there's 3 months of prostate cancer. That was basically that. Where he spoke to me very clearly. You know, I think probably one of the key ones for me, I went to Argentina before I went to Bethel. We wanted to go to Toronto, but we didn't get to Toronto, and I had a chance to go to Argentina. And so I went in 1997. While I was there, I received a fax that promoted me to my first in-charge job running a prison. And, you know, I know it's not about names and things, but just run with me for a minute. Nobody knew me in the Christian world in those days. I went to church and I ran a prison. So, you know, I happened to be with Claudio Friedson, who, you know, I'd never met before. I got to know him while I was there. I was in his church for 8 days. And when I received the fax that told me that I'd been promoted, Claudio put his hands on my shoulders and he looked me as straight in the eye as anybody has ever done. And he said, "Paul, go back to England and run that prison for God." And it was, you know, one level, it might not seem a very supernatural moment, but I was called to ministry. And now 22 years later, I've got one of the greatest revivalists in the world telling me, go and run your prison for him. And that definitely was a game changer for me. It was an absolute game changer. The funny thing is, which is one of those strange things, he looked me in the eye. There is no reason for him to remember, but by the time he came back, he came to Bethel in about 2000 and, I'm not sure, 15-ish, for our family conference, and which is just a closed only church, Bethel Church Go. And he had all the staff line up. We're all lined up and he's going along the line, and I was bent double before he got to me. When he got to me, he said, "Look at me." Like, I told him afterwards, I said, "I don't know what that is, but every time you prayed for me, which is only twice, I had to look at you." So that was a significant moment. My prostate cancer journey, God told me, "I'll kiss you every day if you let me, if you look for me," and he did. And I had some extraordinary experiences with him. Benny Johnson had a dream about me 6 months before my surgery. And that I would save my own life is what the dream meant. And in the middle of the night, when I just had my surgery, I had a serious problem. They thought I'd had a heart attack, but I hadn't. They couldn't get my blood pressure sorted out. And I woke up kind of semi-conscious with doctors asking questions, but nobody seemed to know what to do. And I literally said to God, "You said I saved my life. Give me wisdom." And he gave me a picture in my mind's eye of an old Coca-Cola can where you had to pierce both sides of it to get the fluid out. And I knew that my catheter bag was blocked. And I actually siphoned my own catheter bag, called the nurse over and told her what I'd done. And she argued with me. And I said, "I don't care what you think, change the bag." And I was probably a few minutes away from major organ failure, and I saved my life as a result of a dream. The curious experience in my prostate cancer journey was that I had Judy Franklin, and she does an interesting thing as a sort of sanctified imagination trip to heaven. Now, I had avoided things like that. until I had prostate cancer. And then I just don't care anymore. So I think, so I ran with this thing. And in the middle, I asked Jesus about my cancer, and he said these words to me. He said, "The Lion of the tribe of Judah has taken care of it." Those are the words. I ended, whatever you want to call the experience, it wasn't a trance. And I wrote it down. 2 days later, the Sozo team came to my house. And because I'm on the senior team, I got the mobile Sozo team. And my wife was away for the weekend. And before anything, I said, "Oh, let me, you can do what you like, go after anything. I have no secrets, whatever you need to do." And Dawn De Silva looked at me and said, "Oh, last night for you. And the Lord took me to heaven and he gave me a scroll. Give this to Paul." And when I unrolled the scroll, it was a picture of the lion. She had no idea. Now, fast forward, this is my thought. If he'd said the Holy Spirit's taking care of it, I would have expected a miracle. Lions tear flesh, and I was healed by a surgeon. Now, I don't know how that works out, but I know that was my journey. Now, years later, one of my closest friends, Steve Witt, he had a major, terrible episode of cancer, nearly died, was very, very serious. And he had a dream one night. And in the dream, the phrase was in his head, "The nightingale's in the house." He woke up, he's like, "Nightingales?" He looked it up. Nightingales, they're all about death. He's like, "Oh dear, I'm going to die." And then Bob Jones called him. Now, Bob Jones is crazy but wonderful and, all at the same time. He told Bob Jones. Bob Jones says, "What are you worried about? Florence Nightingale's in the house. The great nurse is in the house." It wasn't until about 2 years afterwards. Now, what happened to Steve was Steve had, they removed his stem cells. They basically gave him enough chemotherapy to kill just about every part of his body. And then they re-injected the stem cells on a day that they call, day one. And then he's nursed for 28 days in the most sterile, safe environment you can imagine. And then he says to me about a year later, he says, "Isn't it funny, Paul? Nightingale's in the house. I was healed by a nurse's skill. You were healed by a surgeon's knife. And God told us both what he would do." So they're a couple. How am I doing? How are my marks on these questions? Are you scoring them,
I think you're doing pretty well, Paul. So that's. I remember hearing that or reading that about you waking up and knowing what the medical problem was that you were struggling with yourself. That's such a wild story. So maybe shifting gears a little bit about where we're at right now. It seems like we're in this pivotal moment in the world, and we're going to sooner or later come out of this lockdown period. Do you have any sense of what you think is going to look a little different after all of this, as we work some of it out and as we shift gears or maybe change directions? What are a few? I know you did a little series on. What was it? The end of modernity, or
disruption of modernity. Yeah. Well, I think we got given a privilege. I don't think God sent it, but we got privileged because I think we got a biblical privilege, because you cannot understand the Christian faith and the Bible without an understanding of captivity, exile, imprisonment, journeying, waiting. You can't. In fact, the scriptures you probably quote come from those places. They come from prison. They come from exile. They come from the journeys. They come from the waiting. So I do think there's a sense of privilege for us. Part of where I came from with this concept of the disruption of modernity, we as a generation have been able to do what we like. We've seen this rise of secularism and post-Christian and postmodern and all of that stuff, most of which I'm not clever enough to fully understand. So I have to narrow it down to something simple that I can get my head around. So we've had a secular society that can do what it likes, and look where it got us. Look at the crazy arguments we've been having over issues around gender and such like. So we've thought we could do what we like. And globalization has meant we can go where we like. And it, pretty extreme, really. One of my favorites that I'm listening to at the moment is that, we got woken up from our selfishness. We're a selfish world. The Western world has become very selfish and out of control. So we could do what we like. We could go where we liked. We could say what we like, social media. An interesting kind of debates around that at the moment, I think. And then we can believe what we like because of fake news. I think we're out of control. And so for me, this is reset. There's some sort of reset that's going on in us. I don't want to go back to a lot of those things. I've been reviewing some of them. Obviously, for me, it's strange. I travel for a living, so this has been don't travel season. To be honest, I've enjoyed most of it. It's probably been a lot harder for my wife than it has for me. So what do I think's going on now? I'll try and do this quickly, but on July the 29th last year, God told me to read Zechariah. It was just kind of impression. I'm not an audible voice guy. I'm not that mystic, really. I'd like to see a few more things. I mean, the only reason I know I've got angels is because people keep telling me I've got an angel, and it seems to be in the same place, stands on the same place behind me. And so I'm good. If you see stuff, I'm glad, let me know, but it's not my experience. So I started reading Zechariah. I wrote at the top of my Bible, July the 29th last year, read Zechariah and I'll give you the keys to a generation. So I started teaching, and I had a song in my head. I'm not a singer. You don't want me to sing unless you want to empty a building. I'm good at that. I could do that. I love music though. And I love worship, and I love closing worship and being around. But I had a song in my head from a guy that some of you will know called Andre Crouch. Heard him sing once a year for about 10 years of my life at a big event in England. And he had a song, Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him, there's no other. Jesus is the way. And I had that song and I began to preach. And I began to preach into this, this world that we found ourselves in. This do what you like, say what you like, believe what you like, say what you like. Began to think about some of the effects of our world. Some of the challenges that people have been facing. I've been watching people around, a number of issues. Loss of purpose has given people, low-grade anxiety, fear of making, choice anxiety, they call it. And people are paralyzed because there's so many choices. The fear of missing out with the whole world of social media, so people live a lie. And there's one other come back to me in a minute. And I started just speaking into these things and saying, Jesus is the answer. And choose you this day who you will serve. Oh, commitment phobia. People have been afraid of making commitments. Listen to a generation jumping from one thing to the next, you know. I've met people who've done YWAM, all 3 years of School of Ministry, Iris, Toronto, and they're looking for the next school. It's like, when are you actually going to commit to something? So we've had all that backdrop. We got say what you like, do what you like, go where you like, believe what you like. World. We got people who are afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of making a commitment. They're living a lie because of social media, and they've got loss of purpose and low-grade anxiety nagging. And then we arrive in this. And I find myself reading Zechariah chapter 4. Zechariah chapter 4 begins with a wake up. It was a big wake up call at Bethel at the beginning of the year with Little Olive and the cry for an awakening. And I think there are two awakenings happening. I think there's an awakening to the fragility of the earth and human life. It's fragile. It really is fragile. And there's not a lot we can do about that. I'm not really all that sure how much we really are entitled to on this planet. If you really read the word. So I started looking and seeing the fragility. So there's a wake up to the needs, the fragility of life. And there's a wake up to the one whose name is Jesus. Zechariah chapter 4 then goes on, and there's the weird images and what does the image mean? And it's translated as not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. And, you know, that's what we need. We need the power. It's Pentecost. We need the power. We cannot have Christianity without power. And then you go on, it says, don't despise the day of small beginnings. And then it says something, it says, the foundation's been laid. Foundations give boundaries. I think we've been building outside of our foundation, and we've become a boundaryless society, and in some respects a boundaryless church, and we need to put the boundary back. We need to build on a foundation. And then it says God's happy because the plumb line is in the hand of Zerubbabel. Plumb lines give you principles to build by. They enable you to build up. Perpendicular, perfect perpendicular. I believe the Lord is looking for us to find the principles of how we live life. And then the chapter ends with an extraordinary verse that says that the sons of fresh oil is actually what it means, are standing by the Lord of the whole earth. And I just believe that we're going to pick up the whole earth mandate, that we've been shifting, but we are going to shift into the whole earth mandate and the release of the sons of fresh oil, the two anointed ones, to go into the whole of the world. And I believe that there is a boldness and a confidence that's been released and is being released. And if I was to draw a diagram, I usually draw quadrants, but there's actually probably only three I'm going to give you. Mark Sayer, who's a genius from Australia, he says that secularism is that people want the kingdom or the benefits of kingdom without the king. And if you look, we've had the development of earth, and so much of what we have achieved is because of kingdom advancement. Men and women who love God. I've got a book on my shelf, The Book That Made Your World. It's written by an Indian professor, and it's about the Bible. It made our world. So all of this advancement, but they don't want a king. He's about to release the reformers who will put the king back in the kingdom. He's going to release the reformers, the businessmen and women, the lawyers, the justices, the members of government. He's going to release people who have a boldness to put the king back in kingdom. I also believe that he's releasing the pure revivalists pursuing a great awakening, who will put the Christ, the anointed Christ, back in Christianity. We have had powerless Christianity, and to put the Christ fully back, right the way across the earth. And I believe that he's going to put creatives and give creatives a mandate to put the creator back in creation. We've got a world that wants to save the planet, but they don't know there's a creator. So I think we're being reset. I believe that the plumb line is being put in our hands. My challenge to you would be, what's your plumb line of truth? We need truth. What's your plumb line of relational order with heaven and on earth? What's your plumb line of your assignment? What is your expression of the assignment of bringing heaven to earth and power? So I draw 4 plumb lines hanging down of relationship, assignment, power, and truth. So I think that's what we're heading to. I think we've been, I like cooking. And about Christmas, I said, I think 2020 for me is going to be the year of simple things done well. I have a feeling it's time for the church to do the simple things really well. And I think we might have made it a bit too complicated. It's time to get it. So I just like to cook simple things, and I'm probably not alone, but I've learned sourdough in this lockdown. I mean, I'm never going to eat any other bread than the bread I make ever again. Talk about simple. It's flour, salt, and water. There's nothing else in it. Nothing else in it. And there's nothing like it. It's nothing even comes close to what I can make in my own home. No baker can come even close. So I've got a feeling that we're going to be taken back to the simple things done well. That was a long answer to your question, but you knew that.
No, it was a big question, in fairness. Yeah, I don't know. Is there? I know one of the things I've heard you say quite a few times is he wastes nothing. He gets you ready. So
on the wall.
Is it? Okay. I can't read it from here.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Just talk about that for a couple of minutes, because I think one of our battles sometimes is either we're in a place where things haven't moved on as quickly as we'd like, and we're like, I just feel like I'm wasting my time here, and when is the thing going to open up? Or we've made mistakes and we're thinking, okay, I'm off course now, or all of that. And I think what the Lord's given you around that is really healing and helpful and restores some hope, despite what our past or our present may look like.
Well, first, it's a mindset. First, it's the way I think. And I believe that's kingdom. Do not be transformed, Romans 12, 1 and 2. Do not be transformed to the image of this world, but by the renewing of your mind. In other words, change the way you think. Prove what is good, etc. So I believe that phrase, which it's really Romans 8:28. He wastes nothing, he gets you ready. You can say all things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose, if you like, but he wastes nothing, he gets you ready is pretty much sums it up. So it's my mindset. It's Sue's and my mindset. Let me quickly give you, I don't know how many characters I'm going to give you. Moses. I'll start with Moses. Moses, he looked after sheep for 40 years. You can read that and think, gosh, what was that? Well, when God needed somebody to tell the people of Israel how to butcher a lamb, guess who he chose? A guy that looked after sheep for 40 years, because they were a bunch of, clay gathering, brick stacking, store gathering, brick baking, brick delivering slaves. Or that Moses was raised in a palace, so who would God tell and describe how to build a tabernacle that looked very much like an Egyptian palace where he was raised? He wastes nothing. He gets you ready. Or Peter, you look at, I like to read Peter's letters alongside Peter in the Gospels. because everything he wrote in the letters, he learned in his mess ups, you know, like, what about make even more certain of his calling and choosing you? Where did he get that one from? When he ran off, you know, when he doubted Jesus 3 times, or, you know, where Peter writes, you're living stones. Where did he get that from? Well, probably when Jesus said, on this rock, I'll build my church. In my life, you know, my personal life, who'd have thought that a guy who ran a prison, who learned strategic planning, running a prison for young people, would travel around the world teaching church leaders strategic planning? How do you do that? How do you fit those pieces together? And so, you know, and there are a number of other things, you know, curious dates. My dad was in Germany at the end of the Second World War, and these days I go to Germany, and I've realized just things that I got even from him. So I can go through my entire life journey and go, you know, he wastes nothing. There's nothing. He'll pull things out if you'll let him. So it's a lens. So my lens of the past is this: he repeats the high points and he redeems the low points. It's the only way he operates if you'll let him. So for me, that's my grid. It's my lens. It's the way I mean, it's this season. He wastes nothing. He gets you ready. You know, people have been criticizing the politicians and saying you weren't prepared for a pandemic. No, probably not. Maybe we could have been better prepared, but hey, the issue isn't are you prepared for a pandemic? The issue is, are you prepared for post-pandemic life? Have you been prepared? Have you allowed yourself to be prepared? If you, like I do, like cooking, when you prepare your vegetables, you'll find a paring knife. Your paring knife is for preparing your vegetables. And you discard what you don't want to keep and you beautify what you do want to keep. And that's what he's doing to us. He's preparing us. I'm not interested in how prepared we were for going in. I'm interested in whether we're prepared to go out. And I believe that, let me just quickly say 4, I think, practical things that each one of you can just kind of grab hold of. Because the of this would be that we didn't get something from it. So number 1, and I got this from Psalm 126 because I felt like God told me, prophets speak into exile and look at what the psalmist sung on the way out of exile. And Psalm 126 is a psalm of ascent, in other words, of going up, coming out of. And it begins with, we were like those who dreamed when the Lord restored. Actually, what it means is when the Lord restored everything stolen because of our captivity. I'll come back to dream in a minute. I see 4 things in a psalm. There are tears. They are a sign of grief. Make sure to allow yourself to grieve. Now, I'm not talking about just big stuff. In fact, one of the problems I think we have is that we'll look at our, you know, whatever, our grandkids' birthday party that they didn't manage to have and think it's not legal to grieve that because there are people who've lost a loved one. Well, we must always keep it in perspective, but you must allow yourself to grieve the loss you've experienced. So tears are the evidence of grief. It's really important for our health that we learn to grieve. And we need, as Bill says, a grief that leads to faith, not a grief that leads to unbelief. Secondly, there's sowing, S-O-W, in Psalm 126. And that's the evidence of life, which is make sure that you live in this season. And I know you might be coming out of it a little bit quicker than us here, but you know, maybe your church meetings aren't. So make sure to live in this season, because sowing is the evidence of life. If you look at Jeremiah, they made sure that they lived. They planted gardens and houses in captivity. And then there's joy. They who sow with tears shall reap with joy. Joy is the evidence of hope. And it's really important that we understand that hope grows in the wilderness. You don't need hope after you've got what you hope for. You need to cultivate hope as a living. And then lastly, and I think this is a really an important one, sure to dream in this season. Don't shut down the dreams. Dream the little dreams. Like, you know, there are things that we haven't been able to do, like you, and you know, like the comment being Pete, you know, he's going to claim all the hugs that he's missed out on. You know, there's the dream, the little dreams, but I also want to encourage you, have the big dreams, because here's the truth: you would say we were like those who dreamed if you don't dream. That verse is the result of dreaming before you could see it. So we've got some little dreams, some things we're going to do, and we got a big dream, a whacking great big dream, an impossible, it has to be God, big dream. And I just look at Psalm 126, and I think there are clues in there for how we come through this season. So yeah, he wastes nothing. He wastes nothing. He is Redeemer. That's his name. So whatever he touches, he'll make it beautiful. And he'll do that with every one of your lives, every one of your circumstances. He just does.
That's so good.
Yeah, that's really good. I liked the kind of the other side of that coin that you focused on in the Kisses from a Good God book, where you talked about, you know, the lie that the enemy tries to give you, that, well, there's nothing could have got you ready for this news that you had cancer, or nothing could have got you ready for, you know, whatever the event is. Just mention that really briefly.
Yeah, that's my wife's actually. And we were walking, when we lived in Redding, California, we had a trail by our house. And it's funny, we've discovered that we have farmland near our house here. We just didn't know it until this pandemic. Now we go for a 5-mile walk every day in fields, and you wouldn't know you were near Heathrow Airport. So we were walking the trail early on in the diagnosis, and I think I said something like, yeah, nothing prepares you. And then I realized that you say that phrase when you've either had sudden tragedy or pain or bad news, or sudden promotion or good news. And it's a lie. We're all being prepared. The issue is whether you can access the preparation, whether you can access what God's put inside of you. So if you're giving a negative confession that says nothing prepared me, you won't see it. But if you start to go, he prepared me, he got me ready for this, he put inside of me, and he really did. You know, one of the things that he specifically did for me was that I had the early diagnosis, which I worked out because I'm an ex-nurse, what was wrong, but it wasn't the full diagnosis, the confirmed scientific one. And when I had the first one, I was in a hotel in Fresno, and I was about to go out to dinner with some friends, and I just got bad news, you know, and I sat on my bed and I said to God, what would Bill do? I really did say that. And I knew the answer. The answer was I'd read the Psalms until I found my voice. And that, you know, that moment that I could access was he wastes nothing, he got me ready, because I had a message that I remembered, but I hadn't put it into practice. So the key was I had been prepared. I just had to have that moment of being still enough to find it. And that one moment in January took me through, and is to this day. A friend of mine is a doctor, and he said to me, he said, that was your miracle. Because in that, he gave you the instruction of how to walk for 3 months, which was, don't study your illness. Because God said, don't study it. He took me to the Psalm that says, your soul is a bad counselor, it will take you to hell. And he told me, don't study your illness. I'm a nurse, and I'm not unintelligent. So for me to not study it was a challenge, but I never studied it. In fact, there were things afterwards that I should have known, but didn't know because I hadn't studied it. It didn't matter, but it was funny when I look back. So he does. I mean, it's the truth of your life. Every one of you, he wastes nothing. It doesn't matter your family background, you know, whether it's good, bad, indifferent. It doesn't matter. He wastes nothing. He'll redeem it. He'll make it beautiful. He'll allow you to use it to bless other people. You know, the greatest tragedy of any tragedy is not just the tragedy. It's that we don't give the tragedy to God. And sometimes this takes time. We don't give it to him and then allow him to give it back to us to bless other people. That's almost a bigger tragedy, because if you don't do that, we'll end up lost in our pain, instead of, you know, I've been reading a book called the Holy Longing, and it talks about it's the Paschal mystery, which apparently is very Catholic. But one piece of it is that we need to embrace our deaths, as it were. And in the ascension, we need to allow our griefs and our pain to ascend, and then allow the Lord to give them back to us to bless mankind out of our pain. And I get it. It doesn't happen overnight if you've just lost someone. But the principle means he wastes nothing. He gets you ready.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. So I guess there's just a couple little pieces I'd like to end with. So if you have a final thought that you didn't get to with any of the other stuff we've mentioned, or maybe just something you want to revisit, Paul, and underline and go, hey, if you forget the other stuff, remember this. I'd love it if you would pray for us and just, you know, the Father's blessing, more of that. We want to come into more of that. And I know that, like, at the very end, I want to open up a tiny little window too, because I know we have somebody on the line who wanted to say a personal thank you for how reading the Kisses from a Good God helped them through some tough stuff. So we'll do that last, but yeah, so I don't know if you want to just hit a couple of those, and then I'll open that window up for.
Well, let me. I'll definitely pray for you. Of course, my privilege. You know, this is where I've kind of a thought I've had. Jesus said to the disciples, "Go and prepare the Passover meal." And in my mind's eye, they went to the shops. You know. So just, you know, they went to the shops, wherever your local shop is. I don't know your area. You have great cheese, I know that. But whatever your shop is, your Safeway, whatever you've got. And so they walk up the stairs into the room for the Passover. And they took the lamb, the wine, the flatbread, yeah, and the bitter herbs and whatever else was. And I've had this visualization. I just kind of want to give it to you and kind of release it. So they went up with the old Passover, and then they laid the table, and then Jesus, it doesn't actually say when Jesus arrived, but he obviously arrived, yeah? And this is the thought I've had, they ate the meal with the Passover lamb, the Passover lamb. They broke bread with the bread of life. And they drank from the cup with the cup poured out. He said, prepare with what you've got, but they left. And in my mind's eye now, I'm visualizing that they left another set of stairs, but they left transformed. And I think that's what he wants to do for us. I think he wants us, we came in with this, well, we'll try and do this, we'll try and do that. But in this season, I think he's been revealing himself to us. I think not necessarily in very mystic ways for many of us. But, you know, some of my thoughts are, I mean, I hope we never forget how much we missed each other. I hope we never forget, not, you know, all the busyness of church, but being together, you know, we're now allowed to do social distancing, one visitor in our back garden at the moment, because we've had pretty tight lockdown where the tail end of week 9 will, so we just had one of our spiritual sons. He drove 2 hours to be here to have lunch with us, in our back garden. And, I hope I never forget how much we mean to him that he would do that. You know what I mean? So I what I'm hoping is that we take what really matters with us down the other flight of steps, and we never forget the richness of this experience, or the things that really matter, what we really value. And some of it's difficult and different. Whoever phrased it first, we're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. It's very true. We're definitely not. But we have all been in this same storm, and none of us quite sure how near to the end it is, and all those kind of things. But I hope that we walk out different, and that we don't waste it. And I think that would probably be it. And Jesus is the answer. He really is the answer. And if we let him speak, he will. So yeah. Let me pray for you. What is there a businessman on here, and you really need wisdom? I just was thinking this morning that there was something about business on this call. I don't know. Is there anyone that would say, you own a business, you're starting a business, anything like that? It's fine if not. I'll pray for you anyway. Maybe you're there, but you haven't told anyone. All right. Well, Father, thanks. Thanks for this family. Thanks for your beautiful bride on this earth. Thanks for how you put together these groups of people. But I ask in that this would be the season that whilst we look forward to gathering, we want to gather on purpose. We want to gather for a reason. We want to gather to be sent out. We want to be gathered to be trained and equipped. We need to be loved on and love each other and get healed up. But may we be ready to gather on purpose, to gather to be sent back out to do what you sent us to do. And Jesus said, as the Father sent me, so I send you. That's what Jesus said. So none of us should be waiting for someone else to lay hands on us. The Father sent Jesus, and Jesus has laid hands on us. So Father, as we're sent, I pray that everyone on this call, I pray that they would hear the words of Jesus to the disciples, greater works than these shall you do. So Father, I bless this family with the greater works. May they see the greater works. I bless them too with what Isaiah said, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor heart conceived what God has prepared. And I bless this family with the greater revelation. And Paul said, we go from glory to glory. Father, I bless this family to go from glory to glory, grace to grace, faith to faith. And Isaiah also said, there will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace. Father, I ask for there to be an increase of your government in this family, which surprises them. An increase, in fact, a redefinition. And that I've said at times, Father, that you only need external government because there's a failure of internal government. I pray for an increased wisdom to steward an internal government that then affects the government outside of these people's lives. So, Father, I bless them. I bless this family for greater works, for greater revelation, for more glory, and for an increase of your government. And also bless them with confidence that he who began a good work in you will complete it, that the foundation's been laid, put the plumb line in their hands, and allow them the grace and the wisdom to build upwards and forwards in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. That's been a full, if we're using food terminology, we've had the full 7-course extravaganza. So I really appreciate you taking time
The taster menu
to do this. It's been very sweet.
My pleasure. Yeah, glad we could do it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, thank you.
And you're a Brit as well, so I mean that makes it all the more. I mean, let's be honest about this.
Yeah.
Oh, let me just say one thing, because obviously my heart breaks. I for America, and as I watch it, and I do believe that this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the bride to truly rise up. And I just posted a couple of things today, but I really do believe that you have the answer, and that the key, I believe, will be to find the wisdom that is not of this earth. And God's going to give it. He's going to release it to the church, but it's a wisdom that's not of this earth. And there are people who are going to get it. They're going to get the wisdom for justice and for peace and for safety and for order and for equality and loving our Black brothers and sisters and demonstrating it. He's going to release it. I really do believe that it's an invitation for the church to grab hold of it. So my thoughts and prayers are definitely with you. It will forever be my second home, land that I love, my friends, my family, a nation that through Bethel obviously changed my life, gave me a new life, saved my life. And so I will forever love the United States of America. I get into trouble sometimes because I wear American soccer shirts around here, but I wear it to remind me of how much I love your land. So there are many people praying for you, but I think it's an invitation for the church to look like Jesus.